The wheelchair creaked softly as Morgan Wheeler rolled through the automatic doors of Riverview Community College, the sound nearly drowned by the thundering of her heart against her ribcage. The campus sprawled before her like a battlefield, filled with unknown threats and hidden obstacles. The air carried the distinct scent of fresh paint, cheap coffee, and something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or dread. After 3 tours in Afghanistan as an elite sniper, she never thought a community college would be the thing to make her palms sweat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Morgan adjusted her worn military backpack on her lap. Its camouflage pattern faded from years of desert sun. The registration papers inside felt heavier than any rifle she'd ever carried. At 32, she was at least a decade older than most. Students milling about the modern glass and concrete building. Their carefree laughter seemed to belong to another world, one she had forgotten how to inhabit. The corridor ahead bustled with the chaotic energy of the first day of the spring semester. Students rushed past in a blur of bright colors and animated conversations, their eyes barely registering the woman in the wheelchair. Morgan pushed forward, her muscular arms propelling the wheels with practiced efficiency. The IED that had taken her legs 2 years ago hadn't diminished her upper body strength. If anything, her arms had become even more powerful, compensating for what she had lost. Finding classroom 104 shouldn't have been difficult. The campus. Map indicated it was on the first floor, but the twisting hallways and poorly marked rooms made navigation a challenge. Morgan paused, scanning the area for any signs or helpful faces. That's when she noticed them, a group of 3 students leaning against the wall, their attention suddenly fixed on her. "Well, look what we have here," the tallest one said, his voice carrying down the hallway. Blake Donovan stood at least 6'3", his athletic build suggesting he'd been the star of some high school team not long ago. His carefully disheveled blonde hair and designer clothes screamed privilege. The military's rolling out their new recruitment strategy. Morgan took a deep breath, choosing to ignore the comment. She'd faced Taliban fighters, some college. Kid with an attitude wasn't going to rattle her. She continued forward, eyes scanning the room numbers. Blake stepped directly into her path, forcing her to stop abruptly. His 2 companions, a lanky redhead with a perpetual smirk and a stocky guy with a buzz cut, flanked him like loyal lieutenants. "Lost, soldier?" Blake asked, his tone dripping with mock concern. "Just looking for room 104, Morgan replied, evenly meeting his gaze with the same steady focus she once used to track targets through her scope. "Advanced engineering." Blake's eyebrows rose slightly, surprise briefly crossing his features before the smugness returned. "Engineering. Isn't that a bit ambitious?" He gestured vaguely toward her wheelchair. The hallway seemed to grow quieter, other students slowing their pace to watch the interaction. Morgan felt the familiar weight of being observed, of being assessed and judged. It was a feeling she'd grown accustomed to since returning stateside with 2 prosthetic legs hidden beneath her cargo pants. "I appreciate your concern," Morgan replied, her voice calm despite the heat rising in her chest. "But I designed targeting systems for the military. I think I can handle a freshman engineering course." The redhead snickered. "Oh, we've got ourselves a real G.I. Jane here, Blake." "Aaron, be nice," Blake said with exaggerated politeness. "She's a hero." The way he emphasized the last word made it sound like an insult rather than an honor. He leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Morgan's. "You know what I think? I think you're just here for the benefits, taking up space that could go to someone who actually has a future in engineering." Morgan's jaw tightened. She'd heard similar sentiments before, whispers about disabled veterans draining resources, taking advantage of systems. Usually she let them slide off her like rain on a poncho, but something about Blake's entitled confidence, the casual cruelty in his eyes, made her pause. "I earned my place here," she said quietly, "just like everyone else." Blake straightened, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Did you, though? Or did you just get a free pass because people feel sorry for you?" He nudged her backpack with his knee. "What's in there anyway? Special accommodations? Extra time for tests?" The third guy, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "Come on, Blake. We're going to be late for Professor Harmon's class." And, there was a hint of discomfort in his voice, as if he wasn't entirely comfortable with where this was heading. "In a minute, Damon," Blake replied without taking his eyes off Morgan. "I'm just having a friendly chat with our military hero here." He reached toward her backpack. Morgan's hand shot out, catching his wrist in a grip that surprised him. Her fingers pressed into pressure points that immediately sent a numbing sensation up his arm. "Don't touch my things," she said, her voice low and controlled. Years of precision and patience reflected in her steady gaze. Blake yanked his arm away, rubbing his wrist with an expression of shock that quickly morphed into anger. "You're going to regret that," he hissed. A middle-aged woman with short grey hair and glasses rounded the corner, her brisk pace slowing as she took in the scene. "Is there a problem here?" Professor Elena Martinez asked, her keen eyes moving between Morgan and the three young men. "No problem at all, Professor," Blake replied, his demeanor instantly transforming into that of a model student. "Just welcoming a new classmate." He stepped aside with an exaggerated bow. "Room 104 is right around the corner, by the way. Wouldn't want our veteran to get lost." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Professor Martinez looked skeptical, but nodded slowly. "Mr. Donovan, I believe you have economics with Professor Lee right now. You might want to hurry." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Blake's smile tightened. "Of course, Professor." He glanced at Morgan, the threat in his eyes unmistakable despite his pleasant tone. "See you around, soldier." With that, he and his friends moved past, Blake deliberately bumping her wheelchair with his hip as he passed. Professor Martinez watched them go before turning to Morgan. "You must be Morgan Wheeler. I'm Professor Martinez, head of the engineering department." She extended her hand. "I read your application essay. Very impressive background." Morgan shook the offered hand, trying to push aside the encounter with Blake. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm looking forward to the program." "Room 104 is just down this hallway on the right," Professor Martinez said, pointing. "And Ms. Wheeler, don't let guys like Blake Donovan get to you. They usually flame out by mid-terms." With a reassuring smile, she continued on her way. Morgan watched her go, then took a deep breath and rolled toward her classroom. The encounter with Blake had left a bitter taste in her mouth, but she'd faced worse, much worse. She was here to rebuild her life, to forge a new path. No entitled bully was going to derail that mission. Class passed in a blur of introductions and syllabus reviews. Morgan found herself seated at a specially designed desk that accommodated her wheelchair, positioned at the back corner of the room. She could feel curious glances from other students, but focused on taking meticulous notes, her handwriting as precise as her former shooting technique. During the break, a young woman with vibrant, blue-streaked hair approached her desk. "That was pretty badass, how you handled Blake earlier," she said without preamble. "I'm Zoe, by the way." Morgan looked up, surprised by the direct approach. "Morgan," she replied, "and it wasn't badass. It was restraint." Zoe grinned. "Even more badass." She perched on the edge of the desk next to Morgan's. "Blake's dad is some big shot donor. He thinks that makes him untouchable." She lowered her voice. "Word of advice, He doesn't forget when someone stands up to him. And he's got a nasty streak. I appreciate the warning, Morgan said, but I've dealt with worse than spoiled college kids. Zoe studied her with open curiosity. Afghanistan, right? I noticed your battalion insignia on your backpack. Morgan nodded, unexpectedly touched by the recognition. Most civilians wouldn't have identified the marking. 3 tours, you know your military insignias. My brother served with the 10th Mountain Division, Zoe explained. He's got all kinds of patches and pins, collects them now. She hesitated. He came back different too. The simple acknowledgement that Morgan had changed, that coming home was its own kind of battle, created an instant connection between them. Before Morgan could respond, the professor called the class back to order, and Zoe returned to her seat with a friendly wave. After class, Morgan navigated the now crowded hallways toward the campus cafeteria. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she'd been too nervous to eat breakfast that morning. The cafeteria was a large, open space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small campus pond. Morgan joined the line, balancing a tray on her lap as she moved along the counter. She selected a sandwich and coffee, then faced the challenge of finding a table. The cafeteria was packed with students, many tables inaccessible to her wheelchair due to the tightly packed chairs. She finally spotted an empty table near the windows and made her way toward it. Just as she approached, a foot extended from a nearby table directly into her path. Morgan's wheelchair came to an abrupt halt as she collided with the obstacle. Her tray tilted, sending her coffee splashing across her lap. The hot liquid soaked through her pants, thankfully missing her skin, but staining the fabric. Laughter erupted from the table. Blake Donovan lounged in his chair, watching her with amusement. "Oops," he said, withdrawing his foot. "Didn't see you there, soldier. Guess your situational awareness isn't what it used to be." Morgan took a deep breath, willing herself to remain calm. She placed her tray on the nearest table and grabbed some napkins to blot her pants. "Really mature," she said, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Just trying to help," Blake replied innocently. "You know, test your reflexes. Seems like they could use some work." His friends snickered on cue. Morgan fixed him with a level stare. "You don't want to do this." "Do what?" Blake spread his hands. "I'm just having lunch. You're the one who ran into my foot." He leaned forward. "Maybe you should stick to classes that don't require mobility, basket weaving perhaps, or maybe just collect your disability check and leave the real education to those of us with actual futures." A hush fell over the nearby tables. Other students were watching now, their expressions ranging from discomfort to morbid fascination. Morgan could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. The familiar pressure of being observed, judged, settled over her like a heavy cloak. "My disability check," Morgan repeated slowly, "is compensation for serving this country, for doing things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your entitled life." She moved her wheelchair closer, her voice dropping so only Blake and his friends could hear. "I've killed men from a mile away. I've watched through my scope as they dropped, so trust me when I say you don't want to make an enemy of me." Blake's cocky smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Is that a threat, wheel girl? Because I'm pretty sure threatening students is grounds for expulsion." He stood up, towering over her. "Face it, you don't belong here. This isn't some VA hospital or rehab center. This is where people with real potential come to build their futures." Morgan felt a familiar calm settle over her. The same focused tranquility that used to come when she had a target in her crosshairs. She knew she could destroy this arrogant boy with words alone, cut him down in ways he'd never recover from. But her training officer's words echoed in her mind. "Your skills are meant to protect, Wheeler, not to destroy. Remember that." Instead of responding, she simply backed her wheelchair away, retrieved her tray, and moved to another table. She could hear Blake's mocking laughter behind her. feel the stares of other students, but she kept her face neutral. This wasn't surrender. It was tactical retreat. Choose your battles carefully. Another lesson from her military days. Zoe appeared. Beside her table a few minutes later, sliding into the seat across from her. "You okay?" she asked, eyeing the coffee stain on Morgan's pants. "Fine," Morgan replied, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Not worth the energy." Zoe glanced over at Blake's table, her expression hardening. "He's such a jerk. Someone needs to put him in his place." "Maybe," Morgan agreed, "but not today and not by me." She'd seen enough violence in her life, started enough of it herself. The weight of those decisions still visited her in nightmares. "You're either really zen or really scary," Zoe observed with a small smile. "I can't decide which." Morgan's lips curved slightly. Probably both. After lunch, Morgan headed to the campus library to study before her next class. The library was housed in one of the older buildings on campus, with wide aisles that made navigation in her wheelchair relatively easy. She found a quiet corner with a table near a window overlooking the campus quad and spread out her engineering textbooks. She became so absorbed in her reading that she lost track of time. The library had emptied out considerably when she finally looked up, noticing the dimming light outside. Checking her watch, she realized she had less than 15 minutes to get across campus to her physics lab. Morgan quickly packed her books and wheeled toward the elevator. As she approached, she saw an out-of-order sign taped to the doors. Frustration bubbled up inside her. She'd specifically chosen this building because it had reliable elevator access. The alternative was a service ramp at the back of the building, which would add precious minutes to her journey. With a resigned sigh, Morgan turned and headed for the back exit. The service corridor was poorly lit and clearly not intended for regular student use. The ramp itself was steep and awkward, requiring all of her upper body strength to navigate safely. By the time she reached the bottom, her arms ached from the effort. The back of the library opened onto a secluded part of campus, away from the main pathways. As Morgan emerged into the evening air, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a sensation she'd learned never to ignore during her deployments. She paused, scanning the area with practiced precision. "Look who it is," came Blake's voice from the shadows. He stepped into view, followed by Aaron and Damon. All alone and off the beaten path. Morgan assessed the situation with military efficiency. 3 opponents, limited escape routes, fading daylight, no witnesses. The tactical disadvantage of being seated while they stood. Not ideal, but she'd faced worse odds. "I'm late for class," she said evenly, beginning to wheel past them. "So are you, I imagine." Blake moved to block her path. "Class can wait. We have some unfinished business." His breath smelled faintly of alcohol, his eyes slightly unfocused. Liquid courage, she guessed. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone today." "You did that yourself," Morgan replied, keeping her voice calm, despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "Now move aside, or what?" Blake taunted. "You'll roll over my toes?" Aaron snickered, but Damon looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Blake, man, this isn't cool. Let's just go." "Shut up!" Blake snapped, without taking his eyes off Morgan. "Little Miss Military thinks she's better than everyone. Thinks she deserves special treatment because she got herself blown up." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "But you're just broken goods now, aren't you? A has-been who can't even walk." Morgan remained still, her expression neutral despite the venom in his words. "Are you finished?" Her calm seemed to infuriate Blake further. He grabbed the arms of her wheelchair, preventing her from moving. "I'm just getting started. You need to learn your place here." "Let go of my chair," Morgan said quietly, a dangerous edge entering her voice. Blake smirked. "Or what, you'll call for help? Scream?" He looked around theatrically. "No one to save you out here, soldier?" "I don't need saving," Morgan replied, her patience finally reaching its limit. "But you might." Before Blake could process her words, Morgan's hand shot out, targeting the same pressure point on his wrist she'd found earlier. This time, she applied more force. Blake let out a yelp of pain as his hand went numb, involuntarily releasing her. "Wheelchair?" She didn't stop there. Years of close-quarters combat training took over. Morgan grabbed Blake's shirt with her free hand and pulled him down, while simultaneously thrusting the heel of her palm upward into his solar plexus. The precise strike knocked the wind from his lungs, leaving him gasping. Aaron lunged forward, but Morgan was ready. She pivoted her wheelchair with expert control, using the momentum to increase the impact as she drove the footrest directly into his shin. A sharp crack was followed by Aaron's howl of pain as he dropped to the ground, clutching his leg. Damon backed away, hands raised. "I don't want any part of this," he said quickly. "This was Blake's idea, not mine." Morgan's focus remained on Blake, who was still struggling to breathe normally. "3 things you should know about me," she said, her voice deadly quiet. 1. I was the top-ranked sniper in my battalion, with confirmed kills that would give you nightmares. 2. After I lost my legs, I spent 18 months in rehabilitation where I learned to compensate with upper body strength that could snap your arm like a twig. She leaned forward slightly. And 3. I have combat-induced PTSD that makes me very, very cautious about threats, so think carefully about your next move. Blake's face had drained of color. Whether from pain, fear, or both, the arrogance had vanished from his expression. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her, not as a disabled woman in a wheelchair, but as a dangerous opponent who had shown remarkable restraint until now. "You're crazy," he gasped, backing away. "You could have killed me. If I wanted. To hurt you, you wouldn't be standing," Morgan replied evenly. "This was a warning. There won't be a second one." Aaron was still on the ground, his face contorted with pain. "I think my leg's broken," he moaned. Morgan assessed him with a clinical eye. "Hairline fracture of the tibia, most likely. Painful, but you'll live." She turned her wheelchair toward the path. "I suggest you get him to the campus clinic and maybe reconsider who you choose to follow." As she began to roll away, Blake called after her, his voice shaking with a mixture of pain and humiliation. "This isn't over. My father is on the board of trustees. When he hears about this—" Morgan stopped and turned back, fixing him with a gaze that had once tracked enemies across desert landscapes. "When he hears that you and your friends cornered a disabled female veteran behind the library, that you physically threatened her, that you've been harassing her all day." She shook her head. "Think carefully about the story you want to tell, Blake, because I'll tell mine exactly as it happened." The threat hung in the air between them. Blake's face contorted with impotent rage, but he remained silent. Morgan continued on her way, her heart rate gradually returning to normal as she put distance between herself and the confrontation. She was late for physics now, but that seemed insignificant compared to what had just transpired. As she rolled along the darkening campus paths, Morgan felt a complex mix of emotions. There was the familiar post-adrenaline crash, the slight tremor in her hands that always came after combat. But there was something else too. A realization that while her body had changed, her core remained intact. She was still a warrior, still capable of defending herself and others. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. Morgan paused for a moment to look up at them, remembering nights in Afghanistan when the desert sky seemed endless, a canopy of stars untouched by light pollution. She had felt small beneath those stars, yet part of something larger than herself. Here, on this college campus, she was forging a new path, not despite her disability, but alongside it. The chair was part of her now, neither a weakness nor a crutch, but simply another aspect of who she had become. And if Blake Donovan or anyone else couldn't see past it to the person she was, that was their limitation, not hers. With renewed determination, Morgan Wheeler continued toward her class, her posture straight and her gaze forward. The battle today had been unexpected, but she had prevailed, and in doing so, she had reclaimed something she feared she'd lost. In that explosion 2 years ago, not just her confidence, but her identity as a protector, a fighter, a survivor. The wheels of her chair moved smoothly over the campus walkway, carrying her toward her future, one turn at a time. News traveled fast on Riverview's campus. By the time Morgan arrived for her morning class the next day, whispers followed her. Through the corridors like persistent shadows, students glanced her way, their expressions a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity. The story had grown with each telling. In some versions, she had put 3 men in the hospital. In others, she had used secret military techniques that left her attackers temporarily paralyzed. The truth was less dramatic, but no less impactful. Aaron had indeed visited the campus clinic with a hairline fracture, just as Morgan had diagnosed. Blake had a bruised solar plexus and a significantly more bruised ego. Damon, who had wisely stayed out of the physical confrontation, was reportedly distancing himself from Blake's circle. Morgan wheeled into her engineering fundamentals class, determinedly ignoring the sudden hush that fell over the room. She positioned herself at her adapted desk and began organizing her materials with methodical precision, a habit carried over from her military days. Every pen and notebook had its place, just as her rifle components once did. "I hear you're the campus hero now," came Zoe's cheerful voice as she slid into the seat beside Morgan. Her blue-streaked hair was pulled into a messy bun today, a pencil stuck through it at a precarious angle. Morgan's brow furrowed. "I'm not anyone's hero. I just defended myself." "Against Blake Donovan and his goons," Zoe emphasized. "Do you have any idea how long people have wanted to see someone stand up to him? His father's money has been his shield since freshman year." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Is it true you broke Aaron's leg with just one hit?" "Hairline fracture," Morgan corrected automatically, "and I'd rather not discuss it." Zoe studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but just so you know, you've made quite an impression." She gestured subtly around the classroom. "Half of them are terrified of you, the other half want to be you." Before Morgan could respond, Professor Chen entered and called the class to order. Morgan was grateful for the interruption, focusing intently on the lecture about structural integrity in engineering design. The irony wasn't lost on her. Structural integrity was something she'd been forced to redefine in her own life after the explosion. After class, Morgan declined Zoe's invitation to join her for lunch. She needed space to process the events of the past 24 hours, away from curious stares and probing questions. She found sanctuary in a quiet corner of the campus garden, a secluded spot with a bench beside a small pond. The February chill kept most students indoors, leaving the space peaceful and empty. Morgan transferred from her wheelchair to the bench. With practiced ease, her upper body strength making the movement appear effortless, she unwrapped a sandwich from her backpack and gazed at the still water of the pond, allowing her mind to settle. "Mind if I join you?" The voice startled her, not because of its suddenness, but because of who it belonged to. Professor Martinez stood a few feet away, a thermos in one hand and a folder tucked under her arm. "Of course not," Morgan replied, shifting slightly to make room on the bench. Professor Martinez sat down, unscrewing the cap of her thermos. The rich aroma of coffee wafted through the crisp air. I come here when I need to think, she said, pouring the steaming liquid into the cap that doubled as a cup. There's something about water that quiets the mind. Morgan nodded, understanding. Exactly what she meant. During her rehabilitation, she'd spent hours beside the small, decorative pond at the VA facility, finding solace in its tranquility. I heard about what happened yesterday, Professor Martinez continued after a moment of companionable silence. The college is taking it very seriously. Morgan tensed. Am I in trouble? Professor Martinez shook her head. Quite the opposite. Several witnesses have come forward, confirming that Blake and his friends cornered you in an isolated area. Your response is being viewed as justified self-defense. She took a sip of her coffee. Blake's father is making noise, of course, but even his influence has limits when faced with multiple corroborating accounts. Relief washed over Morgan, though she maintained her composed exterior. I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to attend classes like everyone else. I know, Professor Martinez said gently, but sometimes trouble finds us, regardless of our intentions. She studied Morgan's profile. Your military record is remarkable, Ms. Wheeler. 3 tours, distinguished service, numerous commendations. Morgan stiffened slightly. You looked me up. I did, Professor Martinez admitted without apology. I make it a point to know my students, particularly those with unusual backgrounds. She set her coffee down. The transition to civilian life can be challenging under the best circumstances. Add a life-altering injury and the academic pressures of college. She let the sentence hang unfinished. I can handle it, Morgan said, perhaps too quickly. I have no doubt, Professor Martinez replied. But handling something alone and handling it with support are 2 very different experiences. She reached into her folder and withdrew a business card, offering it to Morgan. This is Dr. Sarah Levine. She runs our veteran support group on campus. She's also a licensed therapist who specializes in PTSD and trauma recovery. Morgan took the card, reluctantly, glancing at it before tucking it into her pocket. Thank you, but I'm already connected with VA services. Good, Professor Martinez said. Keep the card anyway. The group meets Thursdays at 7 in the Student Union building. She gathered her things and stood. And Ms. Wheeler? What you did required courage. Not the physical confrontation, though that took skill, but coming here, starting over, that's the real bravery. With that, she left Morgan alone with her thoughts and the quiet ripples on the pond's surface. The afternoon passed without incident. Morgan attended her physics lab, where her lab partner, a quiet international student named Raj, treated her with polite respect and made no mention of the previous day's events. The normalcy was refreshing, and Morgan found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of scientific inquiry. As evening approached, Morgan headed to the campus library. Despite the confrontation that had occurred there yesterday, it remained the best place to study, quiet, accessible, and open late. She chose a different section this time, a corner desk on the main floor with clear sightlines to all entrances. Old habits died hard. She immersed herself in her engineering textbook, losing track of time as she worked through complex problems. The library gradually emptied as the hours passed, until only a handful of dedicated students remained, scattered throughout the vast space. Morgan was deep in concentration when she sensed rather than saw someone approach her table. Years of situational awareness training had honed her perception to the point where she could detect subtle changes in her environment. A slight shift in air pressure, the almost imperceptible sound of careful footsteps. She looked up, half expecting to see Blake or one of his friends. Instead, she found Damon standing awkwardly a few feet away, his expression uncertain. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly, mindful of the library's hushed atmosphere. Morgan studied him, assessing potential threats. Unlike Blake, Damon showed no signs of aggression. His posture was non-threatening, his hands visible and empty. After a moment's consideration, she nodded toward the chair across from her. Damon sat down, placing his backpack on the floor beside him. He seemed to struggle with how to begin. "I wanted to apologize," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for yesterday, for being there with Blake. I should have stopped him." Morgan's expression remained neutral. "Why didn't you?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Damon off guard. He fidgeted with the edge of the table. "It's complicated. Blake's family. They have influence. His dad got me an internship at his company last summer. It paid enough for me to cover this semester's tuition." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "That's not an excuse, just context." Morgan nodded slightly, understanding the dynamics at play. Money and power created their own form of gravitational pull, drawing people into orbits they might otherwise avoid. "Blake's always been a jerk," Damon continued, "but lately he's gotten worse, more aggressive, like he's trying to prove something." He hesitated. "After what happened yesterday, he's out for blood, your blood specifically. Is that a threat?" Morgan asked, her voice calm, despite the seriousness of his words. No, Damon said quickly. "It's a warning. Blake's been talking about getting back at you, making you pay." He leaned forward. "I'm not part of it anymore. That's why I'm here. I thought you should know." Morgan considered this information. Wounded pride made men dangerous. She'd seen it countless times in combat zones. A defeated opponent often became more volatile, not less. "What exactly is he planning?" Damon shook his head. "I don't know the details. He's keeping it close. To the chest. But he mentioned something about exposing you, making sure everyone knows you're unstable." He grimaced. His words, not mine. The implication was clear. Blake intended to weaponize her PTSD, to frame her as a dangerous, unstable veteran who posed a threat to campus safety. It was a narrative that played on existing stereotypes and fears about returning military personnel. "Thank you for telling me," Morgan said after a moment. "I appreciate the warning." Damon nodded, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "There's something else. I found this on Blake's desk during study group last night." He pushed it across the table. Morgan unfolded the paper to find a printed copy of a military incident report. Her blood ran cold as she recognized it, a sanitized version of an operation in Kandahar province that had gone tragically wrong. An operation where her unit had taken heavy fire, where she had been forced to make split-second decisions that resulted in civilian casualties alongside enemy combatants. The report didn't include her name. Those details would have been classified, but Blake had scrawled notes in the margins, connecting dots, making assumptions, some dangerously close to the truth. "How did he get this?" Morgan asked, her voice tight. "His uncle works at the Pentagon," Damon explained. "Blake asked him to dig up dirt on you. I don't think his uncle knew what it was for, probably thought it was for a school project or something." Morgan carefully refolded the paper, her mind racing. The incident had been one of the darkest moments of her military career, a situation with no good options, where every choice carried devastating consequences. The official investigation had cleared her of wrongdoing, acknowledging the impossible circumstances, but the weight of those decisions still haunted her dreams. "What is he planning to do with this?" she asked, though she already suspected. "The answer?" Damon looked uncomfortable. "He's going to anonymously send it to the school newspaper, try to connect you to it somehow. Make it seem like you're some kind of war criminal hiding in plain sight." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's messed up. That's why I grabbed that copy when he wasn't looking. But he probably has others." Morgan took a deep breath, centering herself as her mind threatened to spiral back to that dust-choked day in Afghanistan. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, redirecting her thoughts to the present. Damon was quiet for a moment. "My cousin came back from Iraq different," Nightmares, flashbacks, the whole thing. He couldn't talk about what happened over there. His eyes met hers. "Blake's using your service against you. That's not right." Morgan nodded her thanks, unable to find adequate words. The weight of the past pressed down on her, heavier than it had in months. "I should go," Damon said, standing up. "Blake can't know I spoke to you." "I understand," Morgan replied. "And Damon, be careful. Blake doesn't strike me as someone who forgives perceived betrayal easily." With a grim nod, Damon departed, leaving Morgan alone with the folded paper and her turbulent thoughts. That night, sleep eluded Morgan. Her small off-campus apartment felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in as memories she'd worked hard to compartmentalize broke free of their carefully constructed boxes. The incident report had triggered a cascade of recollections. The acrid smell of burning buildings, the deafening crack of gunfire, the heart-stopping moment when she realized civilians were present in what intelligence had assured them was an enemy stronghold. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep. She transferred from her bed to her wheelchair and moved to the kitchenette of her small studio apartment. The space had been modified to accommodate her needs. Counters lowered, cabinets easily accessible, doorways widened. The VA had covered most of the renovations, one of the few processes that had gone smoothly during her transition to civilian life. She made a pot of strong coffee and wheeled to the small desk in the corner where her laptop sat. If Blake was planning to weaponize her past against her, she needed to be prepared. She needed to control the narrative. For the next several hours, Morgan worked methodically. She drafted emails to key people, Professor Martinez, the Dean of Students, the head of campus security. She didn't divulge every detail of the Kandahar incident, but she addressed it head-on. Yes, she had been involved in a combat situation with civilian casualties. Yes, she had been cleared by a military investigation. And yes, she lived with the consequences of that day every waking moment. As dawn broke, painting her small apartment in soft gold light, Morgan felt a sense of resolution settle over her. She had spent too long allowing her past to define her in secret, carrying it like a hidden wound that never quite healed. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge it openly, to integrate it into her present rather than compartmentalizing it away. She thought of the veterans support group Professor Martinez had mentioned. She had avoided such gatherings, preferring to handle her challenges privately. But now, facing a potential public exposure of her most painful experiences, she wondered if community might offer strength she couldn't find alone. By the time morning classes began, Morgan had reached a decision. She would not allow Blake Donovan to ambush her with her own past. She would not grant him the power to define her story. If her history was going to become public knowledge, it would be on her terms, with her voice leading the narrative. She dressed with particular care that morning, selecting her formal military jacket with service ribbons. It was the first time she had worn it since her discharge ceremony. The fabric felt simultaneously foreign and familiar against her skin, a reminder of who she had been and still was underneath the changes. As she wheeled onto campus, Morgan felt a newfound determination. Blake Donovan had unwittingly forced her hand, pushing her toward a confrontation she had long avoided, not with him, but with herself. Today would mark a turning point, one way or another. She spotted Blake almost immediately, holding court near the campus coffee shop. He faltered mid-sentence when he saw her, his expression shifting from smugness to uncertainty as he registered her military jacket and the resolute set of her shoulders. Morgan met his gaze directly, offering a slight nod, an acknowledgement of the battle lines being drawn. This wasn't Afghanistan. There were no hidden explosives, no enemy combatants, no life or death decisions to make in milliseconds. But it was still a battlefield of sorts, and Morgan Wheeler had never backed down from a fight when it mattered. She continued toward her first class, back straight, eyes forward. Whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced everything. Since that fateful day when an IED had changed her life forever, with courage, resilience, and the unwavering determination of a warrior who knew that the greatest battles were often fought not on distant battlefields, but within one's own heart and mind. Behind her, Blake Donovan watched her go, the first flicker of doubt crossing his features as he realized that the woman he had chosen to target might be far more formidable than he had anticipated, not despite her wheelchair, but because of everything that had put her in it and everything she had done to rise above it. Morgan's engineering class buzzed with tension. She could feel Blake's glare from across the room, his hostility a tangible force. She remained focused on Professor Chen's lecture about load-bearing structures, taking meticulous notes while maintaining awareness of her surroundings, a skill honed through years of combat situations. When class ended, Morgan didn't immediately leave. Instead, she approached Professor Chen with questions about the assignment, allowing the classroom to empty. Strategic patience, another military tactic serving her well in civilian life. As she finally wheeled toward the exit, she found Zoe waiting for her in the hallway, concern etched on her face. "You okay?" Zoe asked, falling into step beside Morgan's wheelchair. "Blake's been telling people some pretty wild stuff about you." "I figured he would," Morgan replied, her voice steady. "What's the latest rumor?" Zoe hesitated. "He's saying you were involved in some kind of incident overseas, something about civilians." She lowered her voice. "He's making it sound like you did something terrible." Morgan nodded, having expected as much. "And people are believing him?" "Some are," Zoe admitted. "Others think he's just trying to get back at you for embarrassing him." She studied Morgan's face. "I don't believe anything he says, for what it's worth." "Thank you," Morgan said, simply. They navigated the crowded hallway together, other students parting before them like water around a stone. Morgan was acutely aware of the whispers, the sidelong glances, the sudden silences when she passed. It reminded her of returning home after her injury, the way conversations would stop, gazes would drop to her wheelchair, expressions would shift to awkward sympathy or morbid curiosity. "There's a veterans support group meeting tonight," Morgan said suddenly. "Would you mind coming with me?" The question surprised them both. Morgan hadn't planned to ask. The words had emerged unbidden, revealing a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. Zoe's expression softened. "Of course. What time?" 7, Student Union Building. "I'll be there," Zoe promised. She glanced at her watch. "I've got to run to my next class, but I'll text you later, okay?" As Zoe hurried away, Morgan continued toward the campus center. Her next class wasn't for 2 hours, giving her time to execute the plan she'd formulated during her sleepless night. The campus newspaper office was located in the basement of the Student Union Building, a warren of small rooms filled with outdated computers and the perpetual scent of cheap coffee. Morgan wheeled through the open door, immediately drawing the attention of the half-dozen students working at cluttered desks. A young woman with short black hair and tortoise-shell glasses approached her. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with the editor," Morgan said. The woman extended her hand. "That would be me, Alicia Ramirez." Morgan shook her hand. "Morgan Wheeler. Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" Alicia led her to a small office in the back, closing the door behind them. "What can I do for you, Morgan?" "I understand you might be receiving some information about me soon," Morgan began, meeting Alicia's gaze directly. "Anonymous information about my military service." Alicia's expression revealed nothing, but Morgan noted the slight tensing of her shoulders, confirmation that Blake had already made contact. "I'm here to offer you something better than anonymous allegations," Morgan continued. "An exclusive interview the real story of a female sniper's experience in Afghanistan, including the incident in Kandahar province that changed everything. Alicia leaned forward, interest piqued. That's a compelling offer, but how do I know your version is the truth? Morgan reached into her backpack and withdrew a folder. Because I have the official military investigation findings, my medical records, and my honorable discharge papers. She placed the folder on the desk between them. Full transparency. Alicia opened the folder, scanning the documents with practiced efficiency. This is substantial. Why come forward now? Because someone is trying to use my past to destroy my present, Morgan said simply. I'd rather tell my own story than have it twisted by someone who wasn't there. For the next hour, Morgan shared details of her military career that she had never spoken of to civilians. The rigorous training that had made her one of the top snipers in her unit. The weight of responsibility that came with each mission. The camaraderie that sustained her through the darkest days, and finally, the fateful operation in Kandahar that had gone catastrophically wrong. She described the intelligence failure that had led them into a civilian area, the sudden ambush that had forced impossible split-second decisions, the aftermath of grief and investigation. She spoke of her own injuries months later from an IED, not directly connected to that incident, but part of the same ongoing conflict. Alicia took notes rapidly, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing Morgan to tell her story at her own pace. When Morgan finally fell silent, Alicia set down her pen. This is powerful stuff, she said quietly. When would you be comfortable with us running this? Tomorrow, Morgan replied without hesitation. Your next issue? Alicia nodded slowly. I'll need to verify some of this with military sources. Of course, all the necessary contact information is in the folder. As Morgan prepared to leave, Alicia asked one final question. Aren't you worried about how people will react? This is pretty intense material. Morgan paused, considering. People will judge me regardless. At least this way, they'll be judging me based on facts, not rumors. She met Alicia's gaze. Sometimes the only way past something is through it. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of classes and studying. Morgan maintained her routine with military discipline, refusing to allow Blake's machinations to disrupt her education. When evening arrived, she returned to her apartment briefly to change before heading to the Veterans Support Group meeting. The Student Union building was quiet at 7 o'clock, most students having departed for dinner or evening activities. Morgan found Zoe waiting outside the meeting room, scrolling through her phone. You came, Morgan said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Zoe pocketed her phone. I said I would. She nodded toward the door. Nervous? I don't get nervous, Morgan replied automatically, then caught herself. Actually, that's not true. I'm terrified. Zoe smiled. That makes you human, not weak. They entered the meeting room together. About a dozen people sat in a circle of chairs, with spaces intentionally left open for wheelchairs. The group ranged in age from early 20s to late 60s, a diverse cross-section of veterans from different eras and branches of service. A woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked brown hair, stood to greet them. Welcome, I'm Dr. Sarah Levine. She extended her hand to Morgan. You must be Morgan Wheeler. Professor Martinez mentioned you might join us. Morgan shook her hand, then introduced Zoe. She's here for moral support. We welcome allies, Dr. Levine said warmly. Please join our circle. The meeting began with simple introductions, first names only, branch of service, and how long they'd been out. When Morgan's turn came, she found herself speaking with unexpected emotion. I'm Morgan, Army, sniper with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2 years since medical discharge. She hesitated, then added, still figuring out who I am without a rifle in my hands. Nods of understanding circled the room. These people knew, truly knew what that transition felt like. The loss of identity, of purpose, of the structured world that had defined your existence. The topic for the evening was reintegration challenges. One by one, veterans shared their struggles. A Vietnam-era Marine who still couldn't sleep through thunderstorms, an Iraq War Army medic who had panic attacks in crowded spaces, a young Navy veteran who felt alienated from civilian friends who couldn't understand her experiences. When the conversation turned to Morgan, she found herself speaking about the incident in Kandahar for the second time that day, but differently than she had with Alicia. Here, she didn't need to explain the fog of war, the weight of split-second decisions, the crushing responsibility. These people already understood. "I keep thinking I could have done something differently," she admitted, the words spilling out after years of containment. "Seen the civilians sooner, found another approach, something." An older man with weathered features leaned forward. "Second guessing will eat you alive, daughter. Trust me on that." He tapped his prosthetic leg. "Vietnam taught me that lesson, the hard way." "How do you move past it?" Morgan asked. "You don't," he said simply. "You move forward with it. Incorporate it. Let it be part of you without letting it define you." After the meeting, several veterans approached Morgan individually, offering phone numbers, resources, simple words of solidarity. One woman, an Air Force veteran named Diane, mentioned a specialized physical therapy program for veterans with prosthetics or mobility issues. "They helped me adapt my martial arts training after I lost my arm," Diane explained, showing Morgan a carbon fiber prosthetic. "Military habits die hard. We still need to feel capable of defending ourselves." Morgan exchanged information with her, feeling a weight lifting that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Here were people who saw her wheelchair not as a tragic flaw, but as a badge of service, a testament to survival. As she and Zoe left the meeting, Morgan felt simultaneously drained and energized. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Thank you for letting me," Zoe replied. "That was eye-opening." Morgan nodded. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges with the newspaper article, but tonight, for the first time since arriving at Riverview, she felt less alone. The next morning, the campus buzzed with activity as the weekly edition of the Riverview Chronicle was distributed. Morgan deliberately arrived early, wheelchair moving swiftly along the nearly empty pathways. She collected a copy from a distribution box, then found a quiet spot near the campus fountain to read her own story. Alicia had done an excellent job. The article was factual but compassionate, presenting the complexities of combat decisions without sensationalism. Morgan's quotes were printed verbatim, her voice clear and authentic throughout the piece. Most importantly, the headline avoided clickbait. From battlefield to classroom, a veteran's journey of service and recovery. Students began trickling onto campus, many grabbing newspapers as they passed. Morgan watched their reactions as they read. The surprised looks, the thoughtful pauses, the occasional glances in her direction when they made the connection between the article and the woman in the wheelchair by the fountain. She was so focused on observing others that she didn't immediately notice Blake approaching until he was standing directly in front of her, newspaper crushed in his fist. "You think this changes anything?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "You got your version out first. Clever." Morgan met his gaze calmly. "It's not a version, Blake, it's what happened. You still killed civilians," he hissed, lowering his voice to avoid being overheard. "That blood is still on your hands." The accusation struck its intended target. Morgan felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the flash of memories, dust, and blood and screams. But instead of retreating from the pain as she usually did, she leaned into it, accepting its presence. "Yes," she said simply, "and I live with that every day." She held his gaze steadily. "What's your point?" Her response seemed to confuse him. He had expected defensiveness, anger, perhaps even shame, not this quiet acknowledgement. "My point is, you don't belong here," Blake said, recovering. "Playing student, pretending to be normal. You're broken, damaged goods." Morgan felt a surge of clarity, seeing Blake clearly perhaps for the first time, not as a threat or an enemy, but as a deeply insecure young man whose sense of self depended on dominating others. "We're all damaged in some way, Blake," she said, quietly. "The difference is whether we let it make us smaller or larger people." She gestured toward his crushed newspaper. "I chose to share my darkest moments publicly." "What are you hiding behind your anger?" Color flooded his face. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Morgan replied. "I know you're so afraid of your own insignificance that you need to tear others down to feel powerful. I know you use your father's influence as a weapon because you haven't earned any authority of your own. And I know you targeted me because my disability made you think I was vulnerable, when in reality, it's the source of my greatest strength." Blake's face contorted with rage. "You self-righteous bitch. You think you're so much better than everyone. Because you went to war? Because you got your legs blown off playing soldier? That doesn't make you special. It makes you a fool who got what she deserved." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their cruelty. Blake himself seemed startled by what he'd said, taking an instinctive step backward. Morgan didn't flinch. She had heard worse on her darkest days from her own inner voice. Instead, she felt an unexpected wave of compassion for the angry young man before her. "I hope whatever is hurting you heals, Blake," she said softly. "I really do." Before Blake could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "Is there a problem here?" They both turned to find Dean Richardson standing nearby, his expression stern as he looked between them. "No problem, sir," Morgan said. "Blake and I were just discussing the newspaper article." The dean nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on Blake's hostile posture. "Mr. Donovan, I believe you have a meeting with the disciplinary committee in 15 minutes regarding the incident behind the library last week." Blake's face paled. "I was just leaving," he muttered, turning away. "Ms. Wheeler," the dean continued once Blake had departed, "I read the article. Quite illuminating. If you have a moment, I'd appreciate a word in my office later today." "Of course, sir," Morgan replied, wondering what new challenge awaited her. Throughout the day, Morgan experienced a strange shift in how people interacted with her. The whispers continued, but they felt different, less scandalous gossip, more genuine interest. Several students approached her between classes, some to express support, others to ask thoughtful questions about her service or her recovery journey. In her engineering class, Professor Chen referenced the article directly. "Today, we're discussing how structures respond to sudden, catastrophic stress," he said, glancing at Morgan. "Some collapse entirely. Others, with proper reinforcement and design, can be rebuilt stronger than before. The principles apply beyond engineering." By afternoon, Morgan had received dozens of emails from students, faculty, even alumni who had read the article online. Many were from veterans or family members of veterans, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. One came from a first-year student who had been considering dropping out after struggling to adjust to college. "Life. If you can rebuild your entire life after what you've been through," the student wrote, "then I can handle calculus for one more semester." Morgan was reflecting on these unexpected connections when Zoe found her in the library. "You're famous," Zoe announced, dropping into the chair across from her. "Everyone's talking about the article." "I'm not sure that's a good thing," Morgan replied. "Are you kidding? It's amazing." Zoe leaned forward. "Do you realize what you've done? You've changed the conversation. Yesterday, people were whispering about the disabled veteran who attacked. Some students Today, they're talking about resilience, about rebuilding after trauma, about moving forward without forgetting. Morgan considered this perspective. She hadn't thought of her disclosure as potentially inspiring to others. She had simply been defending herself against Blake's attempts to weaponize her past. "There's something else," Zoe continued, her expression growing serious. "Damon went to the disciplinary committee this morning, told them everything about Blake's behavior, his plans to smear you, all of it." Morgan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That took courage." "Apparently your example was contagious," Zoe said with a small smile. "Speaking your truth, facing the past instead of running from it." She reached across the table, briefly touching Morgan's hand. "You're changing things here, whether you meant to or not." Later that afternoon, Morgan met with Dean Richardson. As requested, his office was spacious and warmly furnished, with large windows overlooking the campus quad. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Wheeler," he said, gesturing for her to position her wheelchair across from his desk. "I wanted to discuss something that your article brought to my attention." Morgan braced herself, unsure what to expect. "Riverview has been attempting to expand our services for veteran students," the dean explained, "but we've struggled to understand their unique needs. Your perspective has been enlightening." He outlined the college's current initiatives: priority, registration for veterans, a dedicated academic advisor familiar with GI Bill benefits, occasional workshops on transitioning to academic life. "But we're missing something fundamental," he admitted. "The experiential aspect, the understanding of what veterans actually need to succeed here." He leaned forward. "I'd like to establish a formal Veterans Affairs Committee with representation from student veterans, faculty and administration, and I'd like you to chair it." Morgan stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Sir, I'm just a first-year student." "Yes, but you have a unique combination of experiences: military leadership, combat deployment, medical rehabilitation, and now academic integration." He smiled slightly. "Not to mention an evident talent for clear communication, as your article demonstrated." "I'm not sure I'm qualified," Morgan said, still processing the offer. "From what I've observed and what Professor Martinez has told me, you are precisely the person we need." The dean handed her a folder. "These are some initial thoughts on the committee's scope and objectives. Take some time to review them, then let me know your decision." As Morgan left the administration building, folder in her lap, she felt strangely disoriented, not by the challenging day, but by the unexpected directions it had taken. She had begun this journey simply wanting to study engineering, to rebuild a life shattered by war. She hadn't planned to become a spokesperson, a leader, a catalyst for change. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus. Morgan paused, her wheelchair on a small rise, looking out over the grounds where students moved about their daily lives. Somewhere among them was Blake, facing consequences for his actions. Somewhere was Damon, discovering his own capacity for courage. Somewhere was Zoe, bridging worlds she had never experienced firsthand, but was trying to understand. And here was Morgan Wheeler, former Army Ranger sniper, current engineering student, future committee chair perhaps, all parts of the same complex, evolving identity. Her wheelchair gleamed in the golden light, no longer a symbol of what she had lost, but a tangible reminder of all she had survived to become. The path forward wasn't clear. It never had been, not really. But for the first time since the explosion that had changed her life, Morgan felt that she wasn't just surviving, or adapting or enduring. She was building something new, something meaningful. Not despite her experiences, but because of them. She took a deep breath of the cool afternoon air, then released it slowly, along with some of the weight she had carried for so long. Then she gripped her wheels and pushed forward, toward whatever came next. 3 weeks had transformed Riverview Community College for Morgan Wheeler. The Veterans Affairs Committee had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed, given academic bureaucracy. Their first official meeting was scheduled for this afternoon in the newly designated Veterans Resource Center, a formerly underutilized conference room, now repurposed with accessible furniture, resource materials, and a small but growing library of books on military to civilian transition. Morgan rolled her wheelchair through campus, no longer attracting the stares that had followed her during those first tense days. Students greeted her by name now, many having read her story or heard about her confrontation with Blake. The most surprising development wasn't the newfound recognition, but the sense of community that had emerged in the aftermath of her public disclosure. She spotted Diane from the Veterans Support Group talking with two younger students near the Science Building. Diane waved her carbon fiber prosthetic arm, signaling Morgan to join them. "Perfect timing," Diane said as Morgan approached. "I was just telling Ryan and Jesse about the adaptive martial arts program at the community center. First session is tomorrow night." Morgan nodded to the students. Ryan wore the distinctive haircut of a recent military discharge, while Jesse's perfect posture suggested similar background. "Marines?" Morgan guessed. Ryan grinned. "That obvious, huh? Infantry, 2 tours in Syria." "Navy," Jesse added. "Nuclear engineer on the USS Roosevelt until last year." "They're both interested in the committee," Diane explained, "and the self-defense classes." Morgan felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had hoped for, creating connections, building resources, helping other veterans find their footing in civilian life. "First committee meeting is at 4 today," she said. "You're both welcome to join us." As they exchanged contact information, Morgan noticed Zoe approaching with a tall, bearded man she didn't recognize. "Morgan!" Zoe called, her blue-streaked hair now sporting additional purple highlights. "This is my brother Matt, the one I told you about." Matt extended his hand. Unlike his sister's vibrant appearance, he dressed in subdued colors: olive drab cargo pants, gray t-shirt, boots. His bearing unmistakably military despite the casual clothes. 10th Mountain Division, Morgan said, remembering what Zoe had mentioned during their first conversation. Matt nodded, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. 3 tours. You? 75th. Ranger Regiment, 3 tours until this happened. She gestured toward her wheelchair. A moment of understanding passed between them, the unspoken language of those who had seen the same dark corners of the world. "Zoe thought I should talk." "And to you," Matt said, his voice carrying the slight hesitancy of someone unused to seeking help. "About the committee, and maybe the other stuff." Morgan nodded, hearing what wasn't being said. The other stuff. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the struggle to find meaning in civilian life. The pieces that didn't fit neatly into college. Brochures or VA pamphlets. "We could use your input," she said simply. 4 o'clock, Veterans Resource Center. She glanced at her watch. "I've got class, but I'll see you both there." Matt nodded, relief briefly crossing his features. "I'll be there." As Morgan continued toward her engineering class, she reflected on how different this moment was from that first day when Blake had blocked her path. The same hallways, the same wheelchair, but an entirely different experience. Professor Chen was discussing structural resilience when Morgan entered the classroom. The ability of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change, yet still retain essentially the same function, he was saying. Resilience engineering doesn't just prevent failure, it anticipates it, adapts to it, learns from it. Morgan positioned her wheelchair at her adapted desk, struck by how perfectly the concept applied to her own journey. Resilience wasn't about remaining unchanged after trauma. It was about integrating the experience, adapting, and continuing to function, perhaps even better than before. After class, Professor Chen asked her to stay for a moment. "I've been reviewing the proposals for the senior design projects," he said, shuffling through papers on his desk. "Your concept for adaptive mobility equipment is particularly interesting." Morgan had submitted the idea almost as an afterthought, a redesign of prosthetic limbs and mobility devices using principles from advanced structural engineering. Drawing on her own experiences with rehabilitation equipment, she had identified numerous flaws and inefficiencies in current designs. "It's just preliminary," she said, surprised by his interest. Senior design projects were typically assigned to fourth-year students, not freshmen. "Nevertheless, it shows remarkable insight," Professor Chen continued. "I'd like you to develop it further, perhaps as an independent study project. With the right refinement, this could have significant real-world applications." Morgan left the classroom with a new sense of purpose. Her military training had taught her to identify problems and find tactical solutions. Now she was applying those same skills to engineering challenges, potentially helping others facing similar mobility issues. The afternoon sun warmed the campus. As Morgan made her way toward the library, she had an hour before the committee meeting, enough time to review her notes and finalize the agenda. The library had become her sanctuary, a place where her wheelchair drew no special attention and her focus could narrow to books and blueprints. She was deeply engaged in research when a shadow fell across her table. Looking up, she was startled to find Blake Donovan standing there, his usual swagger noticeably absent. 3 weeks of disciplinary proceedings had left visible marks, dark circles under his eyes, clothes slightly rumpled, the confident posture deflated. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice lacking its former arrogance. Morgan studied him carefully, assessing potential threats as automatically as breathing. His body language showed none of the aggressive tension from their previous encounters. If anything, he seemed diminished, uncertain. "Sit," she said finally, gesturing to the chair. Across from her, Blake lowered himself into the seat, his movements uncharacteristically tentative. For a long moment, he stared at his hands on the table, apparently struggling to find words. "The disciplinary committee gave me their decision yesterday," he said finally. "Academic probation, community service, mandatory counseling." He glanced up briefly. "No expulsion despite what I did, what I said to you." Morgan remained silent, waiting. This wasn't an apology yet, just a statement of facts. "My father was furious," Blake continued. "Not about what I did, about the embarrassment to the family name." His mouth twisted in a bitter approximation of a smile. "He threatened to cut off my tuition unless I fixed this mess." "Is that why you're here?" Morgan asked. "To fix the mess?" Blake shook his head slowly. "I thought so at first. Came to offer some bullshit apology, get you to put in a good word with the dean." He met her eyes directly for the first time. "But sitting here now, I can't do it. Can't pretend this is about anything except me facing what I did." The honesty was unexpected. Morgan leaned back slightly, reassessing. "I'm listening. I've been thinking about what you said that day by the fountain, about what I'm hiding behind my anger." Blake's voice wavered slightly. "My older brother was a Marine. Died in Fallujah in 2004. I was 10. The revelation landed with the weight of artillery fire." Morgan's perception of Blake shifted instantly, pieces falling into a new configuration. "After he died, my father never talked about him," Blake continued. "Took down all his pictures, packed away his things, like he never existed. The message was clear. Strength matters, weakness gets erased. I learned that lesson early." Morgan nodded slowly, understanding blooming. Blake's hostility toward her hadn't been random. It had been a twisted response to his own unresolved grief, his own complex relationship with military service. "When I saw you that first day," Blake said, "something just snapped. All that buried stuff came rushing back. Your confidence, your resilience, everything my brother had and I don't, everything my father wanted in a son." He shook his head. "I'm not explaining this well." "You're doing fine," Morgan said quietly. "The counselor they assigned me, Dr. Levine, she's been helping me understand some of this." Blake gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out attacking a disabled veteran was rock bottom for me. Who would have thought?" Morgan recognized the name. The same therapist who ran the Veterans Support Group. A deliberate assignment, perhaps. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Blake said, his voice steadying. "I don't deserve it. What I said to you was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand why I did it. Trying to be better." Morgan studied him, the genuine remorse in his eyes, the courage it must have taken to confront her after everything that had happened. Resilience came in many forms, she realized. Sometimes it meant surviving an explosion that took your legs. Sometimes it meant facing the darkest parts of yourself. "My first commanding officer told me something I never forgot," Morgan said finally. He said, "Wheeler, we measure soldiers not by whether they fall, but by whether they get back up." She leaned forward slightly. "You fell pretty hard, Blake, but you're trying to get back up. That counts for something." Relief washed over Blake's features. "Thank you," he said simply. "What happens next is up to you," Morgan continued. "Real change takes more than one conversation or a few counseling sessions. It's a daily choice." Blake nodded, seeming to truly hear her. "I know. I'm just starting to figure that out." He hesitated. "One of my community service assignments is helping with campus accessibility improvements. Ironic, right? Or appropriate," Morgan countered. "You'll learn something about the challenges people like me face every day." As Blake stood to leave, he paused. "Your Veterans Committee, the one I've been hearing about, would it be completely inappropriate if I attended a meeting sometime to learn about my brother's experience?" The question caught Morgan off guard. She considered it carefully, weighing potential reactions from other veterans against the genuine need she sensed in Blake's request. "Not yet," she said finally. "Give it time. Focus on your own healing first. Then we'll see." Blake accepted this with a nod. "Fair enough." He turned to go, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I think my brother would have respected you. I'm starting to." After he left, Morgan sat motionless for several minutes, processing the unexpected encounter. People were more complex than they appeared at first glance. This was a truth she had learned in war and was relearning in peace. Blake Donovan wasn't simply a villain in her story. He was the protagonist of his own, struggling with his own wounds, visible and invisible. The thought accompanied her as she gathered her materials and headed toward the Veterans Resource Center for the committee's inaugural meeting. By the time she arrived, the room was already half full, a mix of student veterans, faculty members, and administration representatives. She recognized Matt sitting beside Zoe, his posture tense but determined. Diane was engaged in conversation with Dean Richardson, while Ryan and Jesse sat reviewing the printed agenda. Professor Martinez approached as Morgan entered. "Quite a turnout for the first meeting," she observed. "You've sparked something important here." Morgan positioned her wheelchair at the head of the conference table, surveying the diverse group assembled before her. 3 months ago, she had arrived at Riverview feeling isolated, an outlier navigating a world designed for others. Now, she was at the center of a growing community, her unique experiences becoming a source of connection rather than separation. "Let's get started," she said, calling the meeting to order. "Welcome to the inaugural session of the Riverview Veterans Affairs Committee. Our mission is to identify and address the unique challenges facing veteran students as they transition to academic life. For the next hour, the group engaged in productive discussion, identifying barriers to success, proposing solutions, sharing personal experiences. Morgan guided the conversation with the same focused competence she had once brought to mission briefings, ensuring every voice was heard while keeping discussions on track. Before we conclude, Dean Richardson said as the meeting neared its end, I'd like to announce that the Board of Trustees has approved funding for a permanent Veterans Resource Center, not just this room, but a dedicated space in the new student services building breaking ground next month. Applause rippled through the group. The dean continued. They were particularly impressed by Ms. Wheeler's article and subsequent advocacy. Sometimes it takes one person's courage to create institutional change. As the meeting adjourned, committee members lingered, forming smaller conversation groups. Morgan found herself approached by Matt, Zoe's brother, who had remained quiet throughout most of the official discussion. I wasn't sure about coming today, he admitted, his voice low. Been avoiding anything military-related since I got back. Trying to outrun it, I guess. Morgan nodded. I understand that impulse. But sitting here, listening to everyone, it's the first time I've felt, he searched for the right word, recognized maybe. Like my experiences matter, even here. They do matter, Morgan affirmed. That's the whole point of this committee. Matt's gaze drifted to her wheelchair, then back to her face. Zoe told me what happened with that Blake kid. How you handled it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Wish I could have seen it. Not my proudest moment, Morgan replied, but necessary. Sometimes that's all we get, Matt said with unexpected insight. Necessary moments, not proud ones. As the room gradually emptied, Professor Martinez approached Morgan again. The adaptive martial arts program Diane mentioned, do you really think that's feasible for someone in your situation? With modifications, absolutely, Morgan replied. I've been developing some techniques on my own, but formal training would be helpful. She smiled slightly. The human body is remarkably adaptable, especially when the mind is determined. I'd be interested in observing, Professor Martinez said. Perhaps there are engineering applications we haven't considered. This casual remark sparked a connection in Morgan's mind. Her senior design project, adaptive mobility equipment, self-defense techniques for disabled veterans. The pieces aligned in a sudden moment of clarity. Actually, Morgan said, I think there might be. Would you be willing to collaborate on something that combines engineering principles with adaptive movement techniques? By the time Morgan left campus that evening, the initial concept had evolved into a potential cross-disciplinary research project, one that could eventually benefit not just veterans, but anyone facing mobility challenges. The spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers as she made her way home. The path was familiar now, her wheelchair navigating the cracks and slopes with practiced ease. 3 months had transformed not just her standing at Riverview, but her relationship with herself, with the woman she had become after Afghanistan, after the explosion, after the long journey of rehabilitation. Her apartment welcomed her with the comfortable silence of a space that had become truly hers. She transferred from her wheelchair to the couch, reaching for her laptop to review notes from the committee meeting. A notification flashed on her screen, an email from Alicia at the campus newspaper. The response to your article has been unprecedented, Alicia wrote. We've received messages from veterans at colleges across the country asking about Riverview's initiative. Would you consider writing a follow-up piece about the committee and your vision for veteran support in academic settings? The request gave Morgan pause. She had shared her story as a defensive measure, a way to take control of her narrative before Blake could weaponize it. The idea of deliberately stepping into a more public advocacy role was both exciting and intimidating. Her phone chimed with a text from Zoe. "Matt can't stop talking about the meeting. Says it's the first time he's felt hopeful in years. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Morgan set the phone down, feeling the weight of impact, not the destructive kind she had once delivered through a rifle scope, but something constructive, generative. The recognition brought both satisfaction and responsibility. She opened her laptop and began typing a response to Alicia, committing to the follow-up article. Then she turned to her engineering project, working late into the night. As ideas flowed freely, the mobility device she envisioned would incorporate principles from both structural engineering and martial arts, creating equipment that enabled rather than merely compensated. Dawn was breaking when Morgan finally set aside her work. She wheeled to the window, watching as soft light transformed the world outside. The morning held a quality of promise that she had nearly forgotten how to recognize during those dark months after her injury. Later that day, Morgan arrived at the community center for the adaptive martial arts class. The converted gymnasium had been arranged to accommodate participants with various disabilities. Wide spacing between training areas, specialized equipment, instructors experienced in adaptive techniques. Diane was already there, demonstrating a modified strike with her prosthetic arm to an attentive group. She waved Morgan over. "Just in time," Diane called. "We're discussing leverage principles for wheelchair-based self-defense." Morgan positioned herself beside Diane, surveying the diverse group. Some participants were veterans, others civilians with congenital conditions or injuries from accidents. All shared the common purpose of reclaiming their physical autonomy, of transforming perceived limitations into unique strengths. "The key isn't to fight like you did before," Diane was explaining. "It's to discover how you fight now with the body you have today." The wisdom of this statement resonated deeply with Morgan. She had been trying to recover her old self, to recapture the person she had been before the explosion. But that wasn't the point of recovery. The point was to discover who she could become now, integrating all her experiences, the combat training, the injury, the rehabilitation, the confrontations at Riverview, the connections formed through vulnerability and truth. As the class began, Morgan felt her body responding to the instruction, her upper body strength, honed through years of wheelchair use, giving her advantages she hadn't fully appreciated. Her tactical mind quickly grasped the adapted techniques, recognizing the physics behind each movement. This wasn't about returning to her former capabilities, it was about developing new ones. Between exercises, a young woman approached Morgan's wheelchair. "You're the veteran from Riverview, right? I read your article. It's why I'm here." Morgan nodded, surprised by the recognition. "I've had cerebral palsy since birth," the woman continued. "Always felt vulnerable, you know. But reading about how you stood up to that bully from your wheelchair, it made me think maybe I could learn to protect myself too." The simple statement confirmed what Morgan had begun to suspect. Her journey wasn't just about her own recovery. It had become something larger, a visible example that might inspire others facing different but parallel challenges. After class, the instructor invited Morgan to demonstrate some techniques she had developed independently. As she showed the group how to use a wheelchair's momentum to enhance defensive movements, Morgan felt a sense of rightness, of purpose, rediscovered in an unexpected context. This was what resilience truly meant, not just surviving catastrophic change, but finding new ways to thrive because of it. Her wheelchair wasn't merely a symbol of what she had lost. It had become an integral part of who she was now, a veteran, a student, an engineer, an advocate, a teacher. As the session ended, participants gathered around Morgan, asking questions about specific techniques and sharing their own adaptations. The exchange was organic, collaborative. People with diverse bodies and experiences learning from each other. Each contribution valuable. Diane joined her as they prepared to leave. "You've got a gift for this," she observed. "The teaching, I mean. You make people believe they can do things they thought were impossible." Morgan considered this. "I just show them what's already possible. They do the rest." Outside, the spring afternoon was giving way to evening, the sky painted in watercolor, hues of gold and pink. Morgan paused for a moment, taking in the beauty with a presence she had rarely allowed herself since returning from Afghanistan. The path ahead would have challenges. She harbored no illusions about that. There would be difficult days, physical pain, memories that ambushed her in unguarded moments. But there would also be this, the satisfaction of purpose rediscovered, the strength of community, the pride of adaptation. Morgan Wheeler, former Army Ranger sniper, current engineering student, committee chair, mentor, and advocate, propelled her wheelchair forward into the gathering dusk. The wheels moved smoothly beneath her hands, carrying her not back toward who she had been, but onward toward who she was becoming. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.